Right? So when you think about the, and nobody wants to talk about the history, but it's important to talk about the history because there's a communication problem. There's an interaction problem. There's a perception problem, right? So you say, oh, come on, slavery, that was abolished like a really long time ago. Let's move on, Okay, so let's move on and let's talk about Jim Crow laws, right? Especially here in the South. And I know that South Florida isn't really necessarily the South, but geographically it kind of is. So let's just look at that for a minute, right? And let's just say that the Jim Crow laws, right, pitted again the police against African American communities. And now if we throw in, a little bit more contemporary issues, let's talk about immigration, right? And the police again as enforcers. So it's almost like this setup. So if we talk about like Match.com, right? And we talk about like trying to get a good union going here, I feel like we have to really acknowledge, and a little bit of the academics talks about acknowledging some of that. Like acknowledging the anger, the hurt, and the rage of the community, and then the anger, the rage, and the healing for the police. Because it's been my experience, as well as what I've studied in terms of post-traumatic stress for police and burnout, that our police are hurting. Our communities are hurting because of racism, because of racial profiling, because of the perception that there's a mistrust in the criminal justice system. Like if you look at not only the poll that you just now heard about, but there's other polls, there's other studies, there's National Institute of Justice studies that have come out that show a disproportionate impact on people of color. So that African Americans and Latinos are more likely than their white counterparts to be stopped, to be arrested, to be convicted for the same crimes, for the same background even. So listen, preaching to the converted, right? Like you guys know this already. You don't need an academic or some retired lieutenant from New York to, NYPD, right? To tell you what you already know. So what are the answers? One thing I know as a cop, as a former cop, former lieutenant, is like anytime there's an incident on the news, I cringe. It must be like what African American folks feel like when they see something that happens on television. It's like, oh, no. Or Latinos feel. Any people of color communities feel. So both sides are right, and both sides are wrong, and both sides need to come together. So how do we do that? And I know that what we've heard is a couple of solutions. We've heard creating a more representative police force. When I was in the NYPD, I was a commanding officer of the recruitment section, and our mayor at the time, Mayor Giuliani, asked us as a police department to try to recruit a more representative police force. So what do the academics say? The academics say that, yeah, if you do that, if you have a more representative police department, one that actually kind of represents the communities in which you serve, that's good news. That's good. Try that. Selection, training, we heard that from the panel of chiefs. How do we select our cops? We don't select them from another planet, first of all, right? We select them from here. And I don't know how many of you have ever heard of Peel's principles of policing, but one of the principles that we say is that, police at all times should maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the historic tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. I used to tell my police recruits all the time in New York, when somebody says, I'm a taxpayer, I pay your salary, you need to remind them that you're a taxpayer too. You pay your own salary. You see, we recruit police from this planet. So that means that we're going to be recruiting the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? It means that there's some good people and there's some not so good people. That means that there's some good cops and there's not so good cops. We know that selection of these police officers are important. So what do the academics say? What does the theory say? The theory says that if I get a cop who is a little bit more educated, if I get a cop who is psychologically stable, if I get a cop who can pass a polygraph, if I can afford to use polygraphs, right? If I get a cop who doesn't have a criminal background, if I get a cop who doesn't have a rage problem, an anger problem, if I get a cop who's not biased, and if I get a cop who really has the heart for policing, we know that there's an authoritarian personality. There's a kind of, listen, I'm 5'2.5". You can barely probably see my head. It's just probably like my forehead is like coming up here. I keep on trying to bounce up so that you can see me, but there's a certain type of personality that like attracts to police work. But I used to ask a room full of police recruits, and we used to put through like 2,000 every 6 months, because we had a big department, At one point, we had like 38,000 members, just sworn officers. And I used to look out into my police, recruit classroom, and I would ask them, why did you become a cop? And most of them would say, because I want to help people. Now, whether we believe that or not, having been a cop for 20 years, I think that most of us feel that way. I think that our heart is in the right place. I think that there's a miscommunication and a misunderstanding between the police and the people. And how do we do that? Well, training was mentioned. Training is great. I was part of verbal judo training. Dr. Thompson, he's amazing. I think that program is excellent. It's about gaining voluntary compliance, right? It's about, crisis intervention and effective communication skills. And all of that is really good. And anti-racism training, cultural competence training our police how to have certain Spanish phrases.